Chapter 7 Altercation. Zuko thinks about stopping. It's easy enough to follow the stranger. Though it has been weeks, months since his last stealthy nighttime outing, it comes back to him as naturally as breathing. He finds every shadow, every corner without thinking, and times his every movement to keep himself hidden. Unlike so many other things, he is good at this. He is good at remaining unseen, unheard. But the stranger's pace quickens, and Zuko begins to wonder if he should be following her at all. He wants to know who she is under that disguise. Of course he does. But it feels like a violation to chase her this way. Like she's an intruder. Like she's unwelcome. She's done nothing but help the people, and she must have her reasons for doing it in secret. Zuko should respect that. He should trust that she hasn't disguised herself with any ill intentions. But he's never been good at trusting people, and there is something else, something strange hanging in the cool night air. The girl hasn't seen him, he realizes. She hasn't looked back once, and yet she keeps moving faster, her stride occasionally breaking from its effortless glide and into something more frantic. Something must have put her on her guard, and if it wasn't Zuko, then there must be another reason. There has to be something else going on. Near the far end of the village, the stranger stops before an open doorway, and Zuko ducks around a corner, heart racing as she peers back over her shoulder. Though she hasn't seen him, she does seem to realize that there is someone behind her. But when he dares to poke his head out again, she's already given up on searching for him, and her gaze trails over the treeless hillside instead. Zuko pulls into the shadows again and rests his back against the wall. He should turn back. He's found his answer. He knows that the stranger is a girl disguised as a spirit. He hasn't seen her face or learned her name, but that should be enough. It's more than he expected to find. Why should he pry any deeper? What if he gets closer to her? What if he finds out who she is? What if his first guess at her identity turns out to be wrong? Worse, what if it's right? How will he deal with that? He shakes his head. That's ridiculous. It's not her. It can't be, and he ought to return to his little shack before the idiotic notion gains any more traction in his mind. He needs sleep before he drives himself mad with wondering. But before he can convince himself to move, he catches a flicker of movement on the hill above the village. Leaning to the side, he squints into the distance. Though it's dark, he thinks he can make out an indistinct figure hidden amongst the scraggly bushes. A man, he thinks. A very, very large man. From the girl's place in the doorway around the corner, she can't possibly see the man, and he can't see her. But the man seems to be watching the path where she will inevitably emerge, crouching and wait for her to pass by his hiding place. Zuko's blood turns cold. He doesn't know either stranger, but the way the man hides in the undergrowth sends shivers up his spine. He's waiting to ambush the girl. That's the only thing that makes sense. Zuko pokes his head around the corner in time to watch the girl emerge from the doorway, drawing in soft, silken mists to surround her once again. He could call out to warn her, but she's far enough away that he would have to shout. If he dares to raise his voice, if he frightens the girl, she might run straight into the trap. And if he alerts the man, it could be even worse. Holding his breath, Zuko edges sideways along the wall, struggling to make out more detail on the hillside. The man hasn't moved. If anything, he's crouched lower, ready to lunge. All at once, Zuko forgets his conflict and he creeps farther along the wall, never allowing his gaze to break from the man hidden in the bushes. This isn't about following the girl anymore. Now she is walking straight into what looks like a trap, and after all she's done to help the people of Shusoku, Zuko owes it to her to investigate. He feels for his swords hanging over his shoulder, and once he's reassured that they're still in place, he makes his way toward a cluster of tall grasses just at the edge of the overgrown meadow. He'll have to cut straight across the slope, avoiding the path to reach the man in time. But fortunately, neither of the strangers look his way. The man halfway up the hill is too preoccupied with watching the girls approach, and though her swirling mists keep her shrouded, she can no more see out than Zuko can see in. Keeping low to the ground, Zuko ducks from cover to cover, hiding behind boulders and bushes and grasses. Though he can't keep his footsteps entirely silent, he remains unseen, and he makes good time up the hill. It isn't until he's closed the gap and is nearly parallel with the girl's position on the path that he gets a better look at the man lying in wait. Tall and massive, with one arm glinting in the moonlight and hair cropped close to his scalp. Enough to affirm the threat in Zuko's mind, but not enough to prove anything. Not enough to recognize the man. But then his head turns just a fraction, and Zuko can make out the mark on his forehead. His stomach drops, and for a second he is frozen in place. For him, at least, seeing that mark in person, even in the dark, even at a distance, is stranger than it would have been to discover that the girl's disguise was genuine. He's heard stories of that mark, of the man who wears it on his forehead for anyone to see. When Zuko was a little boy, the man had sounded like a legend, like the sort of story made up to frighten children into obedience. Except that the man had a name, and it was the adults who were too afraid to speak it above a whisper. Kintaro Bumu, one of his tutors had eventually told Zuko, used to be a soldier, but somewhere along the way, he had traded his allegiance and half of his limbs to the spirits in exchange for power. Father used to laugh at that. Rather than authority, the spirits had given Kintaro a mark on his face and a new way to channel his firebending. Rather than status, the spirits had given him limbs of steel. To Father, it seemed, those bargains were worthless. Though royalty without firebending were useless, no amount of skill could make up for a common birth. But Father was the only one who didn't take the stories seriously. To all the other adults, Kintaro Bumu was a man to be feared. And although Zuko never admitted it, the story scared him too. And then, when Zuko was older, there were a rash of disappearances among the nobility. In every case, there was a single patch of earth melted to something like glass, and a lingering smell of burning on the air. In 2 or 3 cases, there were scraps of the noble's charred clothing left behind. And in only one, there was a witness who swore in the name of all the spirits they knew that Kintaro Bumu himself had reduced the missing man to vapor. Zuko dodges behind a boulder as he tries to catch his breath. It doesn't matter if all the stories are true or not. The fact that the man is here at all means something. The little problem we discussed before your departure is being dealt with. Realization strikes him hard in the middle of the chest. Azula's letter earlier today can't be a coincidence. The timing is too close, and none of the people in Shusoku fit the usual mold of Kintaro's targets. Zuko is the only one who comes close, but Zuko himself isn't the problem Azula promised to eliminate, and Kintaro is focused on the girl. She isn't the Avatar, but she can control mists and heal people and... Zuko bolts out from behind his boulder and sprints for a new hiding place higher up the hill. It doesn't matter if it's her. What matters is that the girl making her way up the hill seems enough like one of the Avatar's companions to be in danger. What matters is that whoever she is, she's done nothing but good. And, Zuko decides as he searches for his next patch of cover, he is through with going to these lengths to win Father's approval. If stopping Kintaro before he reaches the Avatar means that Zuko can never return home, then he thinks that it's a price he's willing to pay. Even with the mists encircling her, Keeping her hidden from sight, Katara can feel eyes following her every movement. The sensation is stronger than before, and she is almost tempted to return to the relative safety of the village. Of course, the villagers will find her. They'll see her disguise and realize where the unexplained help has been coming from, and for all she knows, they might even send word of her exploits back to the capital. But at least she's met some of the people in the village. At least they might think twice before harming her. She can't expect the same from whoever is watching her. The presence feels menacing, and more than anything, she longs for the safety that comes from hiding in a crowd. If something happens to her tonight, it could very well be weeks before anyone knows. At least in the village, someone might find her. At least there, someone might help. But by the time that the idea occurs to her, she has gone too far to turn back, and the prickling along her spine feels closer than ever. She almost wishes that the moon was full so she could search the hillsides for the presence she knows is there, so she could reach out with her bending and find the stranger by their blood. But the moon is still a narrow crescent, and she can neither make out details through her cloak of fog nor push her bending more than a few paces in any direction. She could, however, still manage to fight if necessary. She doesn't have much water with her. Not enough to defend herself properly, but the prospect of a fight still sounds better than this endless uncertainty. She can make it to the river, she thinks, and once she makes it there, she'll confront whatever is after her with no fear, no hesitation. And once this is all over, she'll be able to return to camp at last. Holding her head high and straight to keep from betraying her fear, she veers to the right, off of the path and down the slope toward the river in the distance. She is barely out of sight of the village when she calls all the mist back to her, shaping the water into an orb that she can use to fight if needed, and breaks into a run. Even over the rush of her pulse, she thinks she can hear footsteps behind her, and she pulls the water from the grass in front of her, freezing it into a slick path that will carry her to the river faster. That is her best chance. Maybe her only chance. The footsteps grow louder, more distinct, and though she can't help but feel relieved to know that the presence is real, Katara does everything she can to keep from looking back. She can't lose time. Not until the river is within reach. Not until she has all the water she could possibly need to fight. If she stops now, she may not be able to summon enough from the air and the plants around her. If she stops now, she might be caught. Skidding down the slope on a path of frozen grass is quieter than running, and yet as she continues, the footsteps behind her grow closer and clearer. There is something odd about them. A hitch in the step, one foot landing harder, heavier than the other. Like her pursuer has mismatched feet, and yet they move with equal speed and determination. She glances over her shoulder for the briefest second, just long enough to see the man chasing her, huge and terrifyingly close. A strange, dark pattern carved into his forehead catches her gaze for a moment too long, and she almost stops moving. No. There is no time to stop. No time to wander. No time to question any of this. She just needs to run. She looks forward again, but her frozen pathway hits an uneven patch in the ground and her balance falters. She should have known better. She should have never looked back. Katara catches herself on her hands and springs back to her feet, her hat and veil lying abandoned in the grass. But before she can move further, a sharp, hissing sound begins to gather, and warmth builds up behind her like a bonfire without light. She turns around, drawing on all the water she can find, but it isn't enough, and in the heat, it starts to simmer away before she can so much as shape it into a whip. This is it. Though her heart still races as she tries to back away, her mind is oddly calm and clear. She can't escape whatever this man is doing. She can't fight it. She should have turned back while she still could. She should have taken her chances in the village, but now she's missed her opportunity. Now there's no one around to help her. She wishes that she'd thought to leave the others a message, just a quick note to let them know that she's been visiting the village in disguise. Just a hint so that they might be able to figure out what became of her. She doesn't want to leave Dad and Sokka behind, but the thought of them wondering, never knowing for certain how she vanished from the safety of her campsite, makes it all worse. She's going to die out here, and she doesn't want to be a mystery that haunts her family's dreams for the rest of their days. She is still fighting, still struggling to draw in more water, anything if it might buy her another minute or two, when a dark blur hurtles out of the bushes and launches onto the man's back. It's too dark to tell much about the second figure, but the arms wrapping around the huge man's neck look smaller, slimmer, closer in size to Katara's than the man's. For an instant, she can do nothing but stare, breathless in the oppressive heat. But then the hissing sounds go muffled as the smaller figure presses the flat sides of twin sword blades over the dark patch on the man's forehead. She swings back into motion, backing away one step at a time as she stretches farther and farther with her bending to find even the smallest drop of moisture hidden in the grass. Maybe it isn't over quite yet. If she fights hard enough, maybe she can still get out. Before so much as a drop of moisture responds to her call, the hissing sound rises to an inhuman scream. Threads of blinding white light burst from beneath the crossed swords over the man's forehead, and the heat intensifies until it feels like she's going to choke on her own lungs. It's too much. Too hot. Too bright. Too loud. Even if she could manage to find water to fight with, there is no way for her to bring it close enough to the man to make any difference, and she can feel the whole clearing sizzling itself dry. Katara raises her hands in a vain attempt to block out the screeching as she staggers backward. Too much. Too much. Too much. The light flares even brighter, and then there is a blast so strong that it throws her off of her feet. In the stillness that follows, Katara can't tell where she is. The world is a blackened void, and she can hear nothing over the ringing in her ears. The air is still so hot that it hurts to breathe. Maybe it's over. One way or another, things seem to have stopped. Whether that means that the man is gone, or that he's succeeded, that she is gone, or will be soon, it's impossible to know. But her lungs keep working through the stifling heat, and by the time a breath of cool night air reaches her, shapes have begun to form around her too. She can see faint flickers of starlight overhead, and the trees cast shadows across the near-black sky. For what feels like a long time, she lies in silence, listening to the sound of her own heartbeat. Nothing makes sense, but she seems to be alive. And the man, whoever he is, hasn't come any closer. Maybe he really is gone. When her breathing finally comes a little easier, Katara sits, then gingerly pushes herself to her feet. As far as she can tell, she isn't hurt. Nothing more than a few small bruises and burns, at least. Nothing that a few minutes of healing won't fix. The clearing, on the other hand, is parched and smoldering. It takes a moment for Katara to figure out where the man once stood, but she finally spots a patch of blackened earth nearly a dozen paces away, farther back than she expects. And the man himself is nowhere to be seen. The only definite sign she can find is a few bits of steel still glowing red amidst the wilted grass. He's gone. Whoever the man was, he's really gone. A faint wheeze catches her attention, and Katara turns toward its source. The smaller figure lies farther up the slope, crumpled and unmoving, the pair of swords strewn on either side. Katara hurries that way, details coming clearer as her eyes adjust to the moonlight again. It's a young man, a boy, and though she can hear him breathing, she knows at a glance that it's all wrong. His insides are shattered, and the pieces refuse to find their proper place, It's okay, she whispers instinctively as she kneels down beside him, searching farther up the hill for any scrap of moisture she can reach. You're going to be okay. She isn't sure she believes it, but it feels better than saying nothing. Carefully, she rolls him onto his back and begins searching for wounds she can treat before her eyes inevitably make their way up to his face. Her breath leaves her in a rush and she staggers to her feet. Away from him. Away from Zuko.